Hi everyone, it's Nick. Welcome back to my channel. Okay, in this video today, we are going to be talking about 3 mega interior design trends for 2025. Now, I hesitated putting 2025 on here because honestly, these trends are so much bigger than 1 year, but I needed to put 2025 because you wouldn't have clicked on the video. So that's why we're doing that. But honestly, this is so much bigger than 2025. These are 3 trends that I think are mega trends. These are huge categories of trends that are so much bigger than just 1 year and one thing. These are not pinstripes versus paisley versus, green versus blue paint, okay? This is big, huge trends that I think are fundamentally changing how we live and how we're constructing homes and how we're building and designing our interiors in these spaces. And this is something that are so big and so beyond. And a lot of those smaller trends that I talk about a lot on this channel, I think circle back to these large 3 trends. So let's get going. Okay, first up on my list is gonna be multi-generational living. So when I talk about mega trends, I'm really just talking about trends that I think are bigger than 1 year. Like this is a trend that is bigger than 2025. This really kind of goes back to demographic shifts in how homes are being constructed. And I think that's really important because this isn't just a 2025 thing. This is just sort of an overarching trend that I think we're seeing over several years and will continue to see for several more years to come. I don't anticipate this really changing. So what do I mean by this? Well, I think like in terms of ADUs, accessory dwelling units, basement suites, duplexes, laneway homes, all these sort of different ways of constructing homes is changing. And a lot of that has to do with multi-generational living. Now, in North America, we kind of have this mindset, which is different than the rest of the world, traditionally, post-World War II anyway, that when you turn, well, it used to be 20, but now it's like more like 33, but it used to be that when you sort of went out on your own and got yourself a starter home, you moved out of your parents' house, and then that was when you moved in with somebody else and had a little family, nuclear family, blah, 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 blah. That was kind of the idea, which is not always true in other cultures. And I think that is really now, that formula is changing in North America as we see people living closer to elders in their family. Maybe they could be in their 40s, but maybe they've got their parents living in a laneway in the back, or maybe they have a duplex that they're sharing with each other, or maybe they've got an ADU in the back for when their children get a little bit older and they maybe can't afford their own place, but they want their sort of separate area, and maybe the kids live in the ADU out the back. Like it's changing in terms of these different generations living in closer proximity than they ever have before. I think this is driven for several reasons. First of all, this is becoming increasingly popular, especially in very expensive housing markets. And that's oftentimes because older generations were able to buy real estate at a time where it was more affordable relative to their income. Younger generations are finding that to be much more of a challenge. I live here in Vancouver, which is literally one of the most expensive housing markets in the world. Yeah, you're seeing so much more of this as just an overarching mega trend in design because older generations were able to buy in at a time when younger generations just can't afford it. And so now older generations are able to access equity, to be able to live closer in proximity to their kids, to give them sort of a head start in the market. And you're seeing a lot more of these sort of multi-unit sort of systems sort of in place for different generations to live in close proximity to each other. I think also it's true in multicultural environments. There's a lot more immigration that's happening. And so those traditional sort of North American way of sort of doing things is sort of being disrupted by lots of people coming from all around the world. And they have different ways of sort of kind of constructing their housing to be able to care for elders. It also just makes sense. Like it makes sense for a lot of reasons. As people get older, they require more care. Younger people are able to care for them. Younger people also are finding it difficult to be able to work multiple jobs to make ends meet, and they don't know what to do with their kids, and then enter the older generation that's able to watch them. So it's just really interesting to see these different generations be able to live alongside each other and experience some of the benefits of it and some of the challenges, because let's be honest, living next door to your mother-in-law can seem like a nightmare to most people, let's be real. But if you can make that work, if you can make that work, then it can work out well for everybody. So this is an overarching trend, and it is definitely changing how we construct our homes. It's definitely changing how we look at design, how just in general, how homes are constructed, right? Which I think is really fascinating and a trend that we're gonna see increase in time, especially you will see it more and more. These urban communities or suburban communities where housing is more expensive, land is getting tighter, and people are already living in closer proximity to each other, and we're seeing so much of that sort of wealth disparity and the sort of gap in terms of who can access the real estate market. You're seeing so much more of that. Less so you're probably gonna see in rural communities where land is much cheaper and people can sort of still have that sort of post-World War II, 1950s idea of how you go through life, like I mentioned earlier, but definitely seeing this more and more in urban environments. Okay, a next trend I wanna talk about is going to be prefabricated housing. This is another mega trend that I think is almost like the promise of prefabricated housing. If you've been in the housing world or in the design, interior architecture, whatever sort of space, the design, the prefab movement has long held a lot of promises that have never quite panned out. And I sort of feel that it's changing. And I think that's largely to do with business and government starting to get behind this new way of building. Now, here's the thing. Prefabricated housing is great for a lot of reasons. And there's a lot of like manufactured, there's a lot of different terminology that's around this. But essentially what I mean is building sort of the components of housing in some sort of centralized, contained environment, like a factory setting, shipping it to site, and then going from there. Now, there's different models for how it can work. Some places literally ship you a house. Sometimes it's a kit. Sometimes it's more put together than others. Sometimes it includes plumbing fixtures and flooring, and sometimes it doesn't. Like, there's lots of different businesses doing a lot of different things. They're all trying to solve this puzzle because basically we still build houses in a typical stick-built house. We're still building housing very similar to how we did in the 1950s. As we're seeing increased environmental needs that are going in, right? We're seeing more kind of, you know, there's more kind of sophisticated heating and cooling systems involved. Governments are requiring, you know, things like triple glazed window. All that stuff is getting really, really expensive. And so it's starting to be that you just can't build housing affordably, period. Like you just feel like you just can't because it's getting so expensive to build. And I'm not here to get into the politics of it all, but it's just the reality. The reality is it's just getting more expensive. It's taking longer to get housing to come online. And people are identifying that it's because we're kind of making housing the same way we always did. I think this is an overall mega trend that I was kind of talking about. This is not a 2025 thing. This is just an overall kind of thing. And I'm really fascinated by it. I got to go to Zenny Homes. They actually brought me down to Arizona in like March of this last year, which was really super interesting to actually go tour their factory and see how they're manufacturing their homes, which is really interesting. I've been in talks because, as you guys know, with this house here, I moved in here a few months ago, but I'm going to be building a new house on this site and I'm considering prefabricated. It's starting to get to a point where there's a lot of players in this game with a lot of interesting solutions to this very challenging problem. Governments are starting to get behind it, states, provinces, you know, and honestly, it's because people can't afford and they're putting pressure on their governments to do something about this problem. And that's a good thing because governments have ignored housing for a very long time. I don't get political, but they have. I don't care who you are or your politics, they've all ignored them. They've all ignored housing and we've just watched it get incredibly expensive. And now that they're all being kicked out of government, they decided to do something about it. And so we're seeing a lot more effort and attention being put into this file, which I think is a good thing. And I think it's starting to change the game in terms of how we construct housing, which is really affecting design and I think is fascinating. Okay, and then the third mega trend that I really want to talk about is going to be like sustainability and biophilic design, which is something that I've talked about oftentimes. It's kind of a theme, to be honest, with this channel that I keep coming back to, is people using organic shapes and textures in their interior design, yes, but also in addition to that, just creating more sort of literally incorporating designs from nature into the home. So yes, that can be organic shapes and of course materials and textures and things like that, but it can also literally include sort of living walls or plants into the space and into the architecture, which I think is really fascinating. Some of this stuff is a little bit out there and probably not going to necessarily get mainstream appeal, but I do think that biophilic design, at least through the lens of how we create homes, is something that is a mega trend that we're gonna see increasing. It really improves, it's very mindful of people's connection to nature and how that can create sort of a pleasant living environment for humans to be in. And that's something that I think is just, it's bigger than just a 2025 trend. It just feels like something that sort of, you know, spans beyond just the next few years. And again, also, I've sort of kind of got sustainability in here as well, even though obviously it's not exactly the same, but I do think that sustainability is one of those mega trends that we are seeing more and more of, just because, again, this is something that governments are mandating more and more as, you know, people are more mindful of things like climate change and our impact on the environment when dealing with things like housing construction. We are seeing that those standards standards are ever increasing. So, you know, it depends on where you live, obviously, and it's going to be different depending on your circumstances and your state and government and province, country, whatever. Overall, it's fair to say that in the world, we are seeing this movement towards being much more mindful of the impact that housing construction is playing on our environment. So net zero is something that a lot of governments are mandating. A lot of them are putting them in certain timeframes, a lot of, 2030, 2034. These are big goals that are coming down the road, is going to increase the cost of construction, which is, I think, why you're going to see a lot of pushback from, depending on where you live, in terms of trying to get these goals actually felt. But more and more people are demanding it. People are demanding that their homes not only are able to be beautiful and wonderful, and they're able to really enjoy living there, which is oftentimes what you get with some of the benefits of some of those sort of net zero sort of requirements, but also being mindful of making sure that they're healthy for them to live in, right? We don't have asbestos in the walls anymore for a reason, for a lot of these, for new homes, right? There's a reason for that. And so making sure that they're healthy for their families and that they're safe and that they're also minimizing their environmental impact at the same time. And this is something that is not just a small thing. This is something that is impacting all areas of design. And it really feeds in some of those smaller sort of micro trends that we see, we talk about on this channel all the time. On the issue of energy as well, right? It takes a lot of energy to construct and also maintain a single family home. So there's two sides to that, right? There's going to be how these homes are being heated and how these are being used on a regular basis. And also, which of course is changing, as I have mentioned, and that's becoming the standards that we're sort of expecting from our homes, is increasing all the time. And also things like solar panels, depending on where you live, how you're actually able to produce your energy is going to be different depending on where you are, right? That is something that is a larger trend. Electric vehicles, of course, are in this conversation, solar panels, all that sort of stuff, which I think is really, really interesting. And more we're seeing that becoming a standard and an expectation, and honestly going to be mandated by the government in the future as we sort of move forward through the next decade or two. Okay, so that's it for me for today, guys. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I'm gonna throw here too a video on interior design trends that I think you would really enjoy. And so if you want some of those micro trends, that's more what I'm gonna feature in that video. I hope you really enjoyed this. This is a bit of a different one for me, but I really wanna highlight these big three trends because I think it just fundamentally changes how we're living and going to be living over the next few decades, which I think is fascinating. So I'll see you on the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye.